The heavy air of San Antonio de Bexar smelled of dust and fear. Inside headquarters, General Franklin Clayton presided over the fate of men and women with the same casualness he used to clean his high-laced boot. His officers were laughing at some casual joke, the sound echoing off the adobe walls like an insult to the hunger gnawing at the stomachs of the people outside. A long line of civilians, mostly women and the elderly, waited under the merciless sun for a meager ration of flour and beans, a privilege granted by the man who considered himself the savior of Texas. Clayton relished that sight. The dependency, the desperation in people's eyes was a mirror of his power. He wasn't just a soldier, he was a king in his small, dusty kingdom. Then, a woman stepped out of line, breaking the silent, submissive order. Her name was Hannah Ransom. She didn't have the appearance of an ordinary beggar. There was a straightness to her shoulders, a stubborn dignity in her uplifted chin, even with a face etched by exhaustion and loss. She stopped at a respectful distance from the general, her hands empty, but her gaze steady. "General Clayton," she said, her voice clear, without the tremor of pleading, "my name is Hannah Ransom. My husband, John, fell in battle 2 months ago. He fought under your command." The general raised an eyebrow. "Bored. Many men fought, ma'am. Many died. It's the price of freedom." The laughter of his officers ceased, everyone's attention turning to the unfolding drama. "I'm not asking for myself, General," Hannah continued, ignoring his coldness. "I'm asking for my 2 children. The ration is not enough. They haven't had a decent meal in weeks." Clayton stared at her, a sneer forming on his lips. He stood up, walked slowly towards her, circling her like a vulture. "Your husband died for Texas. That's an honor. Now you want Texas to pay for that honor with bread and meat? The sacrifice should be your own reward." The humiliation was public, calculated. He wanted to make an example of her. "Honor doesn't fill my children's plates, sir," she replied, her voice now laden with a pain that hurt those who heard it. The general stopped, the sneer vanishing, replaced by a mask of irritation. He turned, grabbed a piece of hard, dry bread from a soldier's table, and with a theatrical gesture, threw it on the ground at Hannah's feet. The bread kicked up a small cloud of dust. "There's your extra portion, Mrs. Ransom. The command's generosity." And then he laughed, a loud, cruel laugh that was the signal for his officers to join in. The entire courtyard filled with the sound of mockery, while Hannah Ransom looked at the piece of bread on the dirt, her face a mask of disbelief and pain. The people in line bowed their heads, ashamed, helpless. No one dared to move, no one dared to breathe, but leaning against a wooden pillar in the shadows, almost invisible, a man watched it all. He wore no uniform, only the simple clothes of a frontier hunter. His face was carved by the wind and the sun, and his eyes, a piercing blue, missed not a single detail of that cruel scene. It was Davy Crockett. He didn't say a word. He just watched the woman bend slowly, with the dignity of a queen, pick up the dirty bread from the ground, and turn to leave without looking back. Crockett tasted the bitter tang of injustice in his mouth. He remembered a promise made beside a young soldier dying in his arms, blood staining the Texan soil. "Take care of ours, Crockett. Don't let them forget about us." General Clayton, pleased with his display of power, didn't notice the man in the shadows, whose silence was more dangerous than any shout. If arrogance has a sound, justice has a look. And on that day, Davy Crockett's gaze promised a lesson that Texas would never forget. Hannah Ransom's humiliation spread through the town like wildfire through dry grass. People whispered about it in dark taverns and market corners. General Clayton's act wasn't just cruel, it was a warning. He had demonstrated that the sacrifice of Texas's heroes was worth less than a piece of moldy bread. Fear, which was already a constant companion, deepened its roots. Hannah locked herself away at home with her children. The food she obtained with the help of sympathetic neighbors, like the merchant Silas Whitaker, who gave her a sack of corn from the back of his shop, was consumed in silence. Silas, a good but cautious man, warned her, "Be careful. Hannah, the general has eyes and ears everywhere. He doesn't like to be challenged." Life under Clayton's command became harder. Rations dwindled further for civilians, while parties and banquets became routine at headquarters. The general patrolled the town on his imposing horse, expecting deference but receiving only lowered eyes and resentful silence. He mistook fear for respect, and it blinded him. Meanwhile, Davy Crockett did nothing. At least, that's what it seemed like. He spent his days talking with hunters, with farmers, with old soldiers who were now considered useless. He didn't talk of revenge or rebellion. He listened. He heard the story of a boy's father who lost a leg in the war and now received no pension. He heard of a wife who sold her last family jewel to buy medicine, while the general imported French wines. Each story was a thread, and Crockett, with the patience of a hunter waiting for prey, wove these threads into a net. He saw the pattern. Clayton's power didn't come from his military might, but from the people's belief in their own helplessness. The general had convinced them they were weak, alone, and forgotten. His strength was their weakness. One night, Hannah remembered her husband John. A quick but painful flashback. They were sitting on the porch of their small house, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and purple. "We fought for this, Hannah," he had said, holding her hand. "Not for a piece of land, but for decency, for a place where a man can look his neighbor in the eye, where honor is our most valuable currency." That memory strengthened her resolve. She hadn't been defeated, she had been tested. The bread the general threw on the ground was still kept, wrapped in a clean cloth. It wasn't a symbol of her humiliation, but a receipt, a debt that, somehow, would be collected. Crockett, on the other side of town, watched headquarters from afar. He saw the lights on late, heard the music and laughter. He learned the general's routine, his habits, his weaknesses. His greatest was his vanity. Clayton needed an audience. He fed on admiration and fear. Crockett knew he couldn't defeat him with a single shot. A bullet would kill the man, but not the tyranny he represented. Justice needed to be as public as the offense. It had to be a lesson, not a murder. The idea began to form in his mind, simple and sharp as the blade of his knife. He wouldn't need an army. He would only need the truth and a stage. General Clayton slept soundly, convinced he had crushed the spirit of those people. He didn't know that in every silent house, the seed of rebellion had been planted by his own arrogance, and Davy Crockett, in silence, merely waited for the right time to water it with justice. The opportunity arose like a gift from fate. General Clayton, in his infinite arrogance, announced a grand banquet to celebrate the progress and pacification of the region. It would be an event for his most loyal officers and a few wealthy merchants who supported his regime. The entire town was summoned to decorate the streets, to feign joy, to witness their leader's glory. For Crockett, that banquet wasn't a celebration. It was the stage he had been waiting for. The plan began to be executed in secret, under the cloak of night. The first to be approached was Silas Whitaker, the owner of the general store. Crockett found him in the back of his shop, counting coins under the light of a lantern. Fear was palpable on Silas's face when he saw Crockett's figure emerge from the darkness. "I don't want any trouble, Mr. Crockett," he said, his voice trembling. Crockett didn't threaten him. He just sat on a crate and spoke with the calm of a river before a flood. "Silas, you knew John Ransom? He was a good man. You know his wife? She's a good woman. What do you think John would say if he saw us hiding in the shadows while a man like Clayton toasts with wine over his grave?" The words hit Silas harder than a punch. He stopped, counting the coins, the clinking of metal replaced by a heavy silence. "What do you want me to do?" he finally asked. Crockett smiled faintly. "I want you to talk. Talk to the others, those who lost sons, husbands, those whose land has been threatened. Tell them to be ready." Crockett's next step was subtler. He spent time among the common soldiers, not as a figure of authority, but as one of them. He shared his tobacco, told frontier stories, listened to their complaints about bad food and delayed pay while the officers feasted. He didn't preach insubordination. He just planted a seed of doubt, reminding them of the reason they enlisted, to defend the people, not to oppress them. He found a young corporal, little more than a boy, whose father had fought alongside Crockett years before. The young man idolized him. "My father always said you were the kind of man who would never leave a comrade behind," the young man said. Crockett placed a hand on his shoulder. "Your father was right, and our comrades' families are also part of that promise." He asked the corporal for nothing, just let the idea hang in the air. The plan was risky, as it depended entirely on the character of the people. There would be no violence. The weapon would be shame. Crockett sought out Hannah Ransom. He found her in the yard, mending her children's clothes. She received him with suspicion, but she listened. When he told her his plan, her eyes filled with tears, but also with a long extinguished flame. "Do you think they will have the courage?" she asked. "The courage is already there, Mrs. Ransom. It just needs to be called by name." He gave her a single instruction. At the height of the banquet, when General Clayton was giving his speech, she and the others would enter, not as beggars, but as creditors. The night before the banquet, as Clayton's soldiers polished their bayonets and the cooks prepared pheasants and roasted pigs, Crockett sharpened the only weapon the general couldn't defeat. The truth, the powerful, were preparing for a feast. Little did they know they were setting the table for their own judgment. The hall of headquarters gleamed under the light of dozens of candles. The smell of roasted meat and expensive wine hung in the air, a stark contrast to the hunger outside. General Franklin Clayton was at the height of his glory. Standing, a glass in his hand, he was addressing his officers and guests. His voice was pompous, full of self-praise about sacrifice, order, and the strength of the new Texas he was building. Laughter and applause punctuated his words. He felt invincible, a Roman in his conquered province. It was at this moment that the grand doors of the hall swung open. The sound creaked, cutting off the general's speech. Everyone turned, expecting some servant or a late messenger, but it wasn't. Standing on the threshold was Hannah Ransom. She wasn't dressed in the rags of a mourning widow. She wore her best dress, simple and mended, but clean. Her hair was styled, and her gaze was steady. Behind her, a silent procession. A dozen other women, some old men, and even a few children, all dignified, all clean, all silent, and all carrying an empty plate. Fury contorted the general's face. "What is the meaning of this? Guards, get these people out of here!" But the guards at the door hesitated, because emerging from the shadows behind those families came Davy Crockett. He said nothing, just crossed his arms and leaned against the door frame, his gaze sweeping over each officer in the room. His presence was a force of nature, a silent reminder of the true spirit of Texas. The hall fell into sepulchral silence. General Clayton Crockett's voice rang out, calm, but with the force of distant thunder. "These are your honored guests, the families of the men who paid for this banquet with their own blood. They have not come to beg, they have come to return your generosity." The confusion on Clayton's face was evident before he could react. Hannah Ransom walked slowly toward the long, laden table. She didn't look at the food. Her eyes were fixed on the general. Reaching him, she opened a small cloth she carried. From it, she took out the piece of hard, dirt-stained bread he had thrown at her days before. With a deliberate gesture full of dignity, she placed it on the general's fine porcelain plate, right next to his golden pheasant. "This," she said, her voice clear for all to hear, "is what you gave us in the name of Texas. We've come to return it. We do not accept charity built on dishonor." Clayton stood frozen, his face turning from the red of rage to the pale of shock. One by one, the others followed Hannah's example. An old father placed his son's last letter, stained with blood, on a colonel's plate. A young widow laid down her deceased husband's wedding ring. Each empty plate before an officer was filled not with food, but with a symbol of the sacrifice they had scorned. The air grew heavy, laden with shame. The officers couldn't look at those objects. The food on their plates suddenly seemed rotten. Blinded by fury and public humiliation, Clayton did the only thing a tyrant knows how to do. He drew his pistol, the click of the hammer cocking echoing in the silence. He pointed it at Crockett. "Get out, or I'll remove you myself." Crockett didn't flinch. "Shoot, General. Show them all the true measure of your courage. Show that your only argument is gunpowder against an unarmed people." The young corporal, the one Crockett had spoken with, posted near the wall, slowly lowered the barrel of his rifle towards the ground. His gaze at the general was one of pure contempt. Another soldier, and then another, followed his example. The sound of their weapons hitting the stone floor was the death knell of Franklin Clayton's authority. He was alone, surrounded by his men who no longer followed him, confronted by the victims of his arrogance, and judged by the gaze of a legend. In that room, the general was defeated not by a bullet, but by the weight of a piece of old bread. When the people outside saw the families emerging with heads held high, no one applauded. Only a profound silence fell over the square, the sound of respect returning to their land. General Franklin Clayton's departure from San Antonio was not marked by parades or military honors. He left in the dead of night with a small escort, like a thief fleeing in the darkness. He was not arrested nor executed. His fate was worse, irrelevance. He was transferred to a forgotten post on the frontier where his name would be lost in the dust of history, his career forever tarnished not by a defeat in battle, but by an act of public shame. He was condemned to live with the memory of his power crumbling before an empty plate. With Clayton's departure, the air in the city seemed to change. People walked with straighter shoulders, their gazes more direct. Fear had dissipated, replaced by a renewed sense of community and purpose. The morning after the banquet, a line formed at Hannah Ransom's door. But this time, people didn't come to ask, but to give. Silas Whitaker brought a sack of flour and potatoes. A farmer left a basket of eggs. A neighbor brought a freshly baked loaf of bread. Hannah's house, once a place of scarcity and sorrow, filled with the smell of food and the presence of friends. That communal, impromptu lunch was worth more than all the general's banquets. Davy Crockett didn't stay to receive thanks. He didn't seek power or glory. His mission was to restore honor, and honor had been restored. Before leaving, he stopped by Silas's store. The merchant greeted him with a firm handshake and a look of deep respect. "What will we do now, Mr. Crockett?" Silas asked. Crockett looked at the street, at the people talking and smiling, and replied, "You're already doing it. You're looking out for each other. That's how Texas was built, and that's how it will stand." He mounted his horse and rode away as quietly as he had arrived, his figure dissolving into the horizon. He was not a general or a politician. He was the conscience of Texas, a reminder that true strength lies not in uniforms or titles, but in the courage of a single man or woman who refuses to bow their head. The story of that day became a legend, told around campfires and on the porches of homes. It wasn't a story about a great battle with shots and cannons. It was a more powerful story about how arrogance can be brought down by dignity, how power can be disarmed by truth, and how a simple piece of bread can become a weapon of justice in the right hands. The moral echoed for generations. Freedom is not just won on the battlefield. It is maintained every day in the small acts of decency, courage, and mutual respect. Those who rule by fear will end up alone and forgotten, while those who fight for honor, even when all seems lost, become part of the immortal soul of the land. Years later, when children asked about the legend of Davy Crockett, the elders didn't tell tales of battles and bears. They told the story of a powerful general and a courageous widow. For in Texas, the greatest victory is not conquering the land, but ensuring it remains a place where honor is worth more than gold. If this story of courage and justice moved you, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any tales about the heroes who built our history. Share this video with everyone who loves and identifies with Mexican pride and the values of honor and family. And don't forget to comment from which city or country you are watching us from. Your presence strengthens our community.